Here we are. So good to go. So thanks everyone who's joining us today. My name is Elisa Oberman. I'm the Executive Director at Marine Renewables Canada, and I'm going to be your host for today. We are going to be providing insight on our recently released 2050 sector vision, which is an initiative of national scope that is focusing on ensuring our tidal, wave, river current energy, and offshore wind resources play a very important role in Canada's clean energy future. And so the premise for the sector vision is really this, and you're going to hear a lot more as we go on with a lot of our speakers, but Canada has extraordinary natural advantage in marine renewables. Yet as many as of you know here today, they remain largely untapped in our clean energy transition. And so as electricity demand grows toward 2050, marine renewables can play a meaningful role in strengthening our energy security, supporting coastal and remote communities, and also creating high quality jobs. So the vision that we've created was shaped through extensive engagement with our members, some of you that are here today, industry leaders and partners, and also informed by expert analysis and grounded in real Canadian project experience. I will note it's a vision, so it's aspirational, but yet we really tried to ensure that it was grounded in some reality in terms of what the future may look like. Obviously, getting closer to 2050, it gets a little bit more difficult to forecast. But with that in mind, it outlines a practical pathway to unlock the potential and also identifies where federal leadership can help move Canada from demonstration phase to deployment. So some of you are with us in February when we launched this. We launched it in Ottawa and wanted to provide an opportunity for our members and broader network to just learn more about the vision and also some of the actions that are going to be needed to ensure growth and progress and ensure that we really, meet the goals of the vision. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the lands and waters that sustain us and the many Indigenous peoples who have long stewarded them. And as this is a virtual gathering, we recognize that participants are joining from communities across what is known as Canada and beyond, each located on the traditional territories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we acknowledge their enduring relationships with the ocean, rivers, and coastal environments that are central to marine renewable energy. We also reaffirm our commitment to meaningful collaboration and partnership with Indigenous peoples in the responsible development of marine renewable energy. So a few things before I turn this over to our speakers, and a few housekeeping notes. So this is going to be recorded and you'll be able to see the video on MRC's YouTube page. You'll also be hearing from several speakers today, and we encourage that you ask the questions by using the Q&A function. I think most people are very aware of how to do that, but you could ask the questions throughout the presentations, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll be having a dedicated time to answer all of your questions. So with all of that, I would now like to welcome our first speaker of the day, who is my colleague at MRC, Jonathan Robinson, who is our Senior Policy Advisor, and he played a leading role in developing the sector vision. So he's going to provide a brief presentation on what the sector vision is and highlighting some of the key recommendations. So over to you, Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Lisa. So I will just set this up, and I hope that works correctly. It's my pleasure to be here today to present. I'll give a brief kind of overview of our sector vision and what it entails, what the vision for 2050 is, and mostly focus on the recommendations for how governments can get us there. I will touch on Marine Renewables Canada and what is the vision. Apologies to those for whom that will be a bit of a repeat. Then I'll speak to the benefits of marine renewable energy, the state of the sector, and what our vision is for where it can be in 2050, as well as the key recommendations to all levels of government. So I'm sure most people here are familiar, but for those who aren't, we are the National Industry Association for Offshore Wind, Tidal, Wave, and River Current Energy. MRC has over 215 members, so that's probably a new number for most of you. We are growing. It's been wonderful. And that, of course, includes technology and project developers, utilities, supply chain companies, researchers, Indigenous organizations, and municipalities. And we advocate for the sector We support supply chain development. We support education and engagement initiatives, and we support international business development across the world. So this is what we're talking about today. The Marine Renewable Energy Sector Vision 2050. I definitely recommend everyone, if you haven't yet, check it out on our website and give it a read or a skim, and it's worth a look. At least I have to say it since I helped write it. It is an industry-led vision for how marine renewable energy can help meet Canada's rapidly growing demand for clean electricity, strengthen energy security, and drive economic growth. And this would essentially mean the goal for 2050 and what we could see happening is there could be 33 gigawatts of clean marine renewable energy by 2050. This could help us, of course, reduce diesel reliance in remote communities. We could see 115,000 FTEs over 24 years with a peak employment of about 6,400 jobs just in the offshore wind build out in Atlantic Canada. And it would generate about 12 billion in GDP. And for those who are saying, hey, I've heard bigger numbers, this was a sort of a deliberately conservative estimate. To do directly with the construction of marine renewable energy assets and projects. There certainly would be much greater knock-on effects as well as other aspects such as expansion of ports and such. So deliberately conservative, but that's those are the numbers we've put forward. Now, one of the major pieces we of the vision is, of course, making the case for why marine renewable energy is important to supporting Canada's goals. Um, and it, of course, starts with sustainability and achieving our net zero goals across all industries. So Canada needs a ton more energy, 2 to 3 times more electricity than what we have today. We all know that that's coming, and I think it's pretty clear that it's not just one specific type of energy. It's not going to be just nuclear, just solar, just onshore wind, or just offshore wind. It's going to be all of the above if we're going to achieve what we need to achieve. Um, and the benefits of marine renewable energy in that energy mix are the ability to provide clean power at scale and that consistent, predictable output that supports system need. And there's a whole chapter. It's a little technical in the vision, but for those who are interested, there's a whole chapter on how the specific attributes of marine renewable energy supports a utility system and providing that consistent energy, and especially in a world in which we're shifting to more renewable energy. And then, of course, it helps decarbonize traditional sectors like oil and gas, transportation, and heavy industry. It can make clean fuels. You can put it in remote areas with mines or where resource extraction is taking place, and that helps. So, of course, big piece of this is it drives economic growth and job creation. So the most recently, we know there was 2 trillion invested in 2024 in clean electricity. This is massive global market. This is a massive global transition, and Canada should get its piece of that pie. So marine renewable energy and simply the size and scale of these projects, will attract a lot of economic growth and jobs. And this is long-term, high-value employment. It's in the marine space, an area where Canada has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and where our workers are, prepared to make that transition. And these are highly skilled jobs, and they aren't just during a project construction, but there's actually operation and maintenance jobs throughout, and we make that point in the vision. And of course, with that, there is new opportunities for Indigenous-led projects. We're already seeing numerous sort of community scale, locally owned projects there to get rid of diesel in certain communities. And of course, there's plenty of opportunity for equity ownership as we're already seeing in other renewable energy projects and potentially even in transmission. There's that same potential with marine renewables. Of course, I mentioned diesel in communities. It's going to enhance remote coastal and Indigenous community resilience. Canada has over 280 remote communities. Many of them are diesel dependent. And a lot of those communities are right near a marine renewable energy resource, whether it be wave or tidal or river current. So this can be a wonderful way to reduce the cost of bringing in that diesel, to improve quality of life, whether we're talking about the noise of diesel, the emissions of diesel, and just simply having that energy security of having an asset that can be owned by the community, in the community, providing energy rather than having to rely on shipments. So yeah, it's well suited, as I said. And the other piece of this is that I've spoken to Indigenous communities, have spoken about their desire to start with a community scale project that will replace diesel. And then once they sort of get that off the ground, and achieve that goal, then the next step is to scale that up into, use that experience, use that technology, and participate in larger utility scale projects. So this really is a wonderful economic development opportunity for these communities, and there's a lot of future potential there. So then just a quick piece on the markets for marine renewable energy. So of course we have utility scale and baseload power. There's remote communities, as I mentioned, and then there's the new growing demand, whether it's data centers or green fuel production. Power at sea, like I said, this can work in remote areas where extraction's happening, and then desalination, we note there as an opportunity. Obviously, not so much within Canada, but Canadian technology may have the potential to be exported overseas to support that. So where are we at? Where are we at now? It's a bit more detail in the vision, but just real quick, we do have some amazing things happening at Force in the Midas Passage to work on new tidal deployments. There's already Indigenous partnerships and small scale tidal demonstrations on diesel displacement on the West Coast. Offshore wind, of course, this is an extremely exciting time. We're about to move to Nova Scotia, well, Canada's first call for bids later this year, which is going to probably feature like 3 GW of offshore wind, and paving the way for future development. Wave energy, likewise, there's a lot of research going on in BC, and some of those partners are here today. And one key example is the First Nations-led Yukon Wave Energy project that's advancing Canada's first community-scale wave energy deployment. And of course, we have river current energy. It's being tested at the hub in Manitoba, and lots of potential there. So our vision for 2050, in a sentence, and tough to capture the whole thing in a sentence, but our vision is marine renewable energy as a key pillar of Canada's clean energy transition, supporting climate action, strengthening energy systems, and fostering resilient communities and sustainable growth. We see that happening in 5 areas, and in each of these areas, the vision breaks down the targets into 2030 goals, 2040 goals, and 2050 goals. And that is Canada as a world leader in tidal energy, an established market for offshore wind, and establishing wave energy as a viable component of its clean energy system. We have a vision for marine renewable energy powering remote communities and ocean industries, and then for delivering reliable, predictable, and integrated generation. And that is really that consistent production that we see, those high capacity factors we can see from marine renewables that will really benefit the system. And there's a quick map, the centerfold of the vision, if you will. There is the offshore wind, 32 GW that we see coming online by 2050. There's 1 GW of tidal energy production that we can see coming online. And I'll even say on this, it's a bit of a conservative estimate. That market's developing, and we've seen some recent announcements even since the vision came out in Europe, of France and I believe Portugal making some big bets on tidal, so there could be some more to come. We estimate about 50 communities and remote industrial sites could be powered with marine renewables. And we had the folks at Power Advisory do some work on what all of this would mean in terms of economic output. And we're looking at about 115,000 full-time equivalent jobs and about 12 billion in GDP. And again, that was a conservative estimate focused on the construction activities alone. There would, of course, be knock-on effects throughout the economy that would provide additional benefit. So recommendations. So we were, of course, in Ottawa a few weeks ago starting to pitch these, and we'll be working with governments at federal and provincial level to see if we can put these recommendations in place. And it really is like if these things come to fruition, then we can see the benefits that I outlined on previous slides. So number one, and this is really for all renewable energy development across Canada with renewables, whether it's marine renewables or onshore renewables, you need a diverse energy system that's fully connected and integrated. And so our first recommendation is that federal leadership on regional energy system planning. And for each of our recommendations in the vision, we sort of have an immediate action, and then we usually have a few follow-on actions for longer term follow-up. And in these slides, I'll just sort of note the immediate action, and then I'll verbally speak to a bit of the follow-on actions. So the immediate action right now is we have this 5 gigawatt opportunity in Nova Scotia. So we're calling on the federal government to convene the Eastern Canadian provinces with utility system operators and industry to secure an agreement on interprovincial renewable electricity markets with a clear path for that 5 gigawatts of offshore wind from Nova Scotia. That would provide the market, that would get the industry started. And then from there, we believe that this can be a test case and sort of a proof of concept for how there can be eventually a more permanent system in place for interprovincial renewable electricity markets that we'd like to see. So of course, with that, there needs to be support for interjurisdictional electricity transmission infrastructure, need a way to get the electrons there. So we're calling on the Major Projects Office to prioritize interprovincial transmission infrastructure and support the coordination and structuring of financing as per budget 2025. So that would be coordinating finance from private sector, provincial, territorial partners, and the federal government through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, Canadian Growth Fund, and the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, and putting together that package that will actually get the interprovincial transmission built. We didn't get our Trans-Canada Railway from charging railway users in advance. We got it, it was started by government funding, and in the same way, like we don't think this can be solely on the back of ratepayers. This is a major nation building initiative to connect our grids and create those renewable energy markets. And so we think the funding strategy needs to address that. Of course, setting realistic long-term procurement targets for marine renewable energy, industry needs predictability that they can plan on, and then they can sort out what their project pipelines are based on that demand. So for Nova Scotia, we'd like to see targets and timelines for offshore wind and tidal energy procurement and long-term ones. For British Columbia, there's been some great progress with the recent calls for power and the commitment to a call for power in 2028. But we would like to see a more long-term structured, this is how much you're going to get in 2-year intervals that future projects can bid against or bid for. And then for Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as New Brunswick, we'd like them to start to define what their clear offshore wind procurement targets can be so we can get the ball rolling there. And of course, the other coast, the Great Lakes. So the government of Ontario, I think it's time that they show that they're open for business by removing barriers to offshore wind development in the Great Lakes and with a clear path to responsible project development. And we do emphasize responsible project development. This can have, reasonable reasonable path and reasonable regulation around what the government would like to see in the Great Lakes, but we'd like to see some options. We'd like to see more federal leadership on diesel reliance and support for Indigenous equity opportunities in the area. So we're calling on Natural Resource Canada to partner with provinces and territories, Indigenous organizations and research institutes to enhance national mapping and resource assessments for wind, tidal, wave, and river current. So to identify where those areas of development are, and out of those 280 communities I mentioned earlier, like which ones are most likely to benefit from marine renewable energy development. And then, of course, a renewal and expansion of the federal support programs under the Wallatoose label that have that mission to fund renewable energy programs that replace diesel. Currently, those programs are oversubscribed or sunsetting, so we need sort of a resurgence of support for that. De-risking private capital in the long term, we'd like to see more around PPAs and or different ways of supporting the purchase of clean electricity. But in the short run, the immediate thing governments can do is simply extending the clean economy ITCs through to 2040. The development timelines on offshore wind do not align with having it all online by 2035. Maybe some of it might be online by 2035, but really these are, Canada's clean energy transition is going to take decades, and we'd like to see the ITCs extended to reflect that. Investment in electricity transmission infrastructure. This is going to be both provincial and federal. Once again, the interprovincial piece is important, but we're going to need to see transmission and interconnection capacity within provinces as well, just to make renewable energy markets work. And I think that's fairly straightforward. We're going to need to see strategic and timely investments in port infrastructure, as Net Zero Atlantic did a wonderful report on the needs of ports across Atlantic Canada to support the build out of Nova Scotia's offshore wind resources. And they sort of outlined some areas for development, and we'd like to see Transport Canada dive into that. And then, of course, this is still going to take more R&D and demonstration in many of these areas. So we'd like to see there's a lot of programs that support R&D and in the federal government, and we'd like to make sure that those are tailored to the specific requirements of marine renewable energy, since it is a little unique in its requirements often. And we see NRCan taking a lead role in that across the federal government to align those funding programs. Of course, throughout our development, we're going to need to see coexistence with other ocean users and ways to facilitate community involvement in marine renewable energy. So we do see a space for this for marine spatial planning and resource assessments that identify where potential development sites are and how that coexists with existing ocean use. We saw that with the regional assessments for offshore wind in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and we'd like to see it with other resources as well, and in other provinces. And then, of course, throughout this development, industry will need to work in partnership with Indigenous communities to integrate Indigenous knowledge, priorities, and economic goals into project development as a first principle. And we're, happy to, MRC's always happy to work with communities and with industry on that and advancing those goals. And then just to speed up the last three, so we also have some recommendations on there for supply chain development. We have some for streamlining permitting, but I don't actually need to talk about it much because the federal government seems to be doing this, and we're actually quite hopeful about the current efforts. And then international collaboration, whether it's research or whether it's the business side itself. This is really an international, globally integrated industry, and there's a lot of opportunity for Canadian research and for Canadian companies abroad. And with that, there is the entire Sector Vision 2050 in just over 20 minutes. So like I said, I appreciate everyone's time, and definitely check it out on our website.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And also, you got us kind of back on schedule with our a little bit of a late start. So for those of you attending, one thing I will mention is if you haven't looked at the sector vision document yet, it's on our website. It is a lengthy document. And so Jonathan just kind of scratched the surface with it. But if you have a look or based on what you heard during the presentation, please feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A and we'll try to get to those at the end. And in addition to the presentation that Jonathan just provided, we also wanted to provide some insight on what the sector vision actually means for those who are active in the marine renewable sector, just to help put it in context for you of the significance of this piece of work and what we're trying to do with it. So today I'm joined by 3 guest speakers who are longstanding members of MRC and also are champions in the sector working in different areas of marine renewable energy. And so they're all coming on camera now. So today we have Riley Richardson with University of Victoria's Pacific Regional Institute for Marine Energy Discovery, or PRIMED, Lindsay Bennett with Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy, or FORCE, and Don McDonald with AECOM. So to kick us off, how about just each of you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work in the sector, and we'll start with that, and then we'll move into more of the questions and discussion. So I'll start with Lindsay.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. So I'm Lindsay Bennett, Executive Director of Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy, or FORCE. So we're based in Nova Scotia, Canada. FORCE is Canada's tidal energy test center in the Bay of Fundy, and we provide shared infrastructure, grid connection, and environmental monitoring to support the development and demonstration of tidal stream technology. Our work sits primarily on the research, testing, and sector development side of the industry. We act as a hub that brings together developers, researchers, governments, Indigenous rights holders to advance tidal energy responsibly.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Over to you, Riley.
Thanks so much, Elisa. As mentioned, I'm Riley Richardson. I'm a project manager at Prime, so a research lab based at the University of Victoria. And we're really focused on enabling the development of marine renewable energy technologies in BC, really focusing on that small scale kind of community led projects. So we provide applied research across engineering, regulatory and policy guidance, social sciences, resource assessments, and environmental monitoring.
Great, thanks, Riley. And Dawn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Don McDonald. So I am the Global Market Sector Lead for AECOM. I've been working in the offshore wind space since about 2014, working initially on European projects in development, competitive bids, straight on through to operations. Since I joined AECOM, I now work with our teams around the world in offshore wind developments in around Europe, Australia, and Taiwan in particular, as well as some emerging markets. Nice to be with you all.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you all for making the time for us today with this. So just to kick us off, I think one thing I'll also mention to the audience, and this will kind of feed into our first question for all of you, as it's been a long time since we've had a comprehensive strategy for the sector. So some of you who may have been members with Marine Renewables Canada for a long time will probably recall that the last 2 strategies we had were in 2011 and 2012. So obviously a lot has changed in that time frame, which is why we view having some kind of document and initiative like this being, very significant for sector growth. So for our panelists, more broadly, how do you anticipate that the sector vision can play a role in the growth of the marine renewable energy sector in Canada? And maybe I will start with Riley first.
Yeah, I think it's just really beneficial to have those long-term goalposts and an actionable pathway in which we can involve government, the private sector, academia, Indigenous communities, and marine stakeholders to try and achieve those goals. So really about showcasing to government what the value of marine energy is, its alignment with kind of provincial and Canadian energy goals, and then showcasing there's a need to support the sector en route to that. We need to provide confidence, especially to the private sector, that the capital investments and the work they're doing to bring technologies and projects to market is supported by government.
Great, thanks, Riley. Dawn, maybe same question for you, and then I'll go to Lindsay with the same question as well.
Sure. I think it's actually a really timely update. If you just look at the general political, economic news, there's lots of competing visions for Canada's economic, environmental, and energy future. And this really brings to the forefront the position that marine renewable energy can play in that future space for Canada in addressing our growing energy demand, building out grid resilience, energy inequality, aiding net zero, and supporting economic growth in underserved coastal areas. I think it's fantastic that the vision has set out some really concrete steps that governments, both federal and provincial, can take. We're hearing lots of positive support, but this gives them some direction to take that support, and it lays out a bit of a roadmap for international investors on Canada's potential and ambitions in this space.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Lindsay.
Yeah, sure. So we're very excited about the sector vision because it makes it clear that Canada's marine resources are strategic, clean energy assets. This isn't just niche technologies. It's also incredibly exciting for us that we've got, the world's most powerful and successful tidal turbine coming to Canada. It's been in operation in Scotland since 2021, and it generates more energy than Orkney can even use. But part of the long-term vision for our sector is not, hanging things on single projects or technologies. We know that, marine renewable energy is a longer-term play, and it's about Canada's, enormous resource strength, and that's forever. And then just lastly, kind of similar to Riley's comment, the vision represents national coordination as opposed to regional silos. So we know that we feel that this is essential to scaling marine renewables. So there's, primed on the West Coast, there's the Canadian Hydrokinetic Turbine Test Center in Manitoba, community-led projects for us that all have important experience and expertise to contribute. And as the vision suggests, our alignment is what gets us to 2050.
Great. Yeah, all very good points. Thank you all for that. During Jonathan's presentation, he outlined, some of the key recommendations, and the vision has 14 recommendations and associated actions. So there's a lot there. And I know all of you have read through it and, played a role in helping us develop it. So I'm wondering, speaking from the part of the marine renewable sector that you work in, what recommendation would have the greatest impact for you and the work that you do? And maybe I'll reverse it this time and start with Lindsay.
Okay, thanks. Well, I am biased for offshore wind. It might be a national grid, and that might become true for tidal, but right now, targeted support for R&D is the most important recommendation from our perspective, because it produces the transparent and trusted science that regulators, investors, Indigenous rights holders, and communities need for projects to be able to scale up. So for tidal energy, confidence will come from evidence and how we gather it, with long-term monitoring, fish movement data, real-time imaging, and co-designed studies that reflect both Mi'kmaq knowledge and Western science are crucial. And for Indigenous partners, R&D enables the true stewardship by ensuring they have information needed to assess impacts and shape decisions. For regulators, it reduces the uncertainty and will accelerate approvals. And for communities, it builds social license by showing what's happening in the water and us just not asserting, that we know that.
Yeah, agreed. And Dawn, for you, what's the top recommendation that would have an impact?
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, transmission and offtake are both very high. But if I had to pick one, I would say the integrated national grid, because it essentially sets out a framework by which we can actually build a business case, getting that energy where it needs to be within Canada, and allows us to look more holistically at the benefits of offshore wind.
Yeah, agreed. And Riley?
I would say Primed is always supportive of focused research supports. Like, we need to understand these resources and characterize them more. But really what stood out to me is the procurement targets is kind of the overarching recommendation that provides that confidence in the sector and kind of gets everybody together on the same page, moving towards these goals. And then specifically in BC, it's really about Indigenous partnerships and participation. So if BC Hydro doesn't see wave and tidal as being commercially viable, and the sector really wants to look at supporting diesel displacement in remote communities, those projects need to occur from, feasibility, design to implementation with Indigenous communities, and they need to be involved in the decision making on how those get built out and ensure their values and local contexts are factored in.
Yeah, no, good point. So this, I'm going to kind of move to some individual questions just based on, all of your focus areas. And Dawn, you had mentioned grid and transmission infrastructure. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. But starting with the fact that, we know that there's often a long gap between where we are right now with having the, wind areas designated and then actually seeing projects built. And so my question is, what critical enabling infrastructure is needed, and how do we ensure that these timelines match the coming demand?
So in terms of actual physical infrastructure, the key is ports and transmission. But added to that, I think, is a workforce that actually understands and is ready for the sector. The timeline's a challenge in every market around the world. And there's a fundamental gap that I think governments are probably best positioned to address between when an offshore wind developer or marine energy developer is ready to make a commitment to port or transmission infrastructure and when they need that work to actually start. So addressing that gap in development spend, I think, is one of the core areas that there's a role for federal and provincial governments to kind of step in to trigger that work so that we're ready to execute and that infrastructure can be ready on time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I agree completely. And then going back to some of your points, Riley, and I know that with Prime, you've been very involved in this side of things. So what kinds of early investments in training, governance capacity, or technical expertise do you feel are the most important now to ensure that Indigenous communities are positioned as long-term leaders in the marine renewable sector? And I was thinking you probably have some very pertinent and relevant thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think most importantly, as projects are being developed or different Indigenous nations are interested in understanding the potential of marine renewable energy within their traditional territory. So maybe we're undertaking resource assessment work in partnership with them. It's really utilizing and leveraging existing capacity in communities. So coastal guardian programs, fishing vessels, these sorts of things that can support deployment of wave buoys or acoustic Doppler current profilers. Also working to leverage environmental and traditional ecological knowledge and kind of setting baseline environmental assessments for projects. And then longer term, it's also looking at community energy champions. So a lot of communities in BC have really strong Indigenous leadership in developing community energy plans. And they can provide a lot of value, whether it's in building out a project with a developer or looking long term to get youth involved in programs like Indigenous clean energy, or going to post-secondary institutions to explore engineering, biology, all these different aspects that are going to be really crucial jobs within the marine energy sector, but they also have transferable skills to other projects as well. So I think that sort of capacity, starting with where communities are at, and then showing the opportunities provided by marine energy project development.
Okay, yeah, no, it's great. Now, I think going over to the tidal side of things, we talk a lot about the Bay of Fundy having world-class tidal resources, and we've had years of experience of testing already there and getting the site ready, and lots of research and experience coming from that. So from your perspective, Lindsay, what do you think is the next big hurdle that the sector needs to go, the tidal sector specifically, must jump through to achieve sustained commercial deployment and, having a full capacity at force and all the berths filled?
Yeah, well, the next important milestone for tidal energy in the Bay of Fundy is achieving a full year of continuous device operation. and we are moving towards that. So reaching that milestone would let us capture a full cycle of environmental data across all 4 seasons, see how electricity production performs through, spring and deep tides and in that, environment. And it gives the sector the kind of real operating data we need. So data on energy production, reliability, operating costs, revenue for developers, and ultimately the price to consumers, or start to understand that better. So, with a full year of data, we move beyond modeling and shorter deployments to a much stronger evidence base. And that database or data set allows regulators, governments, developers, and investors to engage the next set of questions about scaling the industry.
Okay. Great, thanks. This is another one I'm going to throw out to all of you because it was something we tried to explain as clearly as we could in the vision, which is just around, cost of energy. And when a lot of times when we talk about clean electricity, we're looking at LCOE, but obviously we know that there's a lot of other attributes that different energy sources bring to the mix as a whole. So the vision argues that we need to move beyond lowest cost energy toward a system value, evaluating reliability, predictability, and resilience in the place of LCOE. So I'm wondering, and I think I'll try to touch on this with all of you. Can you give a real world example from your work where a Marine Renewable project delivered value that wouldn't necessarily show up in just a simple cost comparison? Because I think that's one of the things we're trying to educate and get, utilities, government, others to really understand what that value looks like. And so maybe I'll start with Dawn first.
Yeah, I think was a fantastic example that happened just quite recently, January 25th, 26th, something along that lines here in Canada and in the US Northeast. There was a really substantial winter storm. And during that storm event, Quebec actually, with their largely hydro-powered grid, actually drew more megawatts into their own grid and had to actually shut down exports. In the US Northeast, that left them in a bit of a quandary because their alternative is, barring offshore wind, was natural gas. Natural gas prices spike, prices go up very, very high for local rate users. However, luckily, some of these offshore wind assets were in place. So those projects that are currently installed along the US Northeast, the Vineyard project was 75% capacity factor during that storm event and provided incredible power when people needed it. So it's that climatic disparity between you want that diversity of energy sources, and there's a really good balance in Canada between hydro and offshore wind. Offshore wind peaks in the winter, and like cold, dry winters, that's when offshore wind's going to operate at its best. That's the worst conditions you're going to expect for hydro. So it's good to have those differing options because we don't live our lives on averages. We live our lives in those kind of peak events, and it's important to have those options when you need them.
Yeah, agreed. And putting all of our eggs in one basket, we have learned, as you have explained, it never ends up leading to a real positive result in the end. So, Lindsay, what about with tidal? Do you have thoughts on, the overall value versus LCOE?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the clearest examples from our work where tidal energy delivers value that doesn't show up in that simple cost comparison is the local supply chain impact. So when we build a test or a tidal device, and there have been 6 of them in Nova Scotia to date, 60 to 70% of the required goods and services come from companies right here in Nova Scotia. And once the device is operating, as we've seen in Grand Passage, Nova Scotia, and also at the Force site, in a few instances, more than 80% of the annual O&M spending stays local. So we estimate that there's already been about 500 local regional companies involved in the supply chain for the tidal sector so far in the Bay of Fundy, and upwards of 200 million probably in economic activity as part of that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And that's one thing at the opening I had mentioned, that one of our drivers for this is obviously increasing electricity demand and how marine renewables can meet that challenge. But the other side of it is also, Canada is very focused on economic growth right now. And this is another untapped economic opportunity that we haven't been able to, tap into that much yet. So yeah, I agree with you on the supply chain. And Riley, what about you coming at it maybe from kind of that remote community, Indigenous community perspective?
Well, I agree with Don. The real benefit in offshore wind and wave is the peak availability in winter months, and then tidal and its predictability, which makes it a bit easier to integrate into microgrid systems. For instance, at Blind Channel, we're trying to demonstrate that as a real world example to show the benefit of that energy. And then I think at the utility scale, BC Hydro and their latest integrated resource plan, they're really focused on considering the suitability of intermittent resources based on their effective load carrying capacity. So in a given peak average demand, which occurs during a winter week, what what percentage of that installed capacity of the intermittent renewable resource could be reliably counted on to contribute to that peak demand? And for solar, which is the cheapest electricity available on Earth, that's 0%. So we're really trying to focus a few different research projects moving forward to try and contribute to the understanding around offshore wind, wave, and tidal in BC, and to have that uptake from BC Hydro to show those benefits to the grid.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm hoping that the vision and some of the work we're doing to kind of get some of this messaging out to the broader audience here helps with, and complements some of that you're doing as well. Um, Maybe just going on to like a specific question here around offshore wind and kind of focusing a bit more on the coastal communities and what has been done in other places. So where I'm going with this is the fact that this is obviously new for Canada. When we think of offshore wind, these are large projects, but they can feel, and even though there's benefits to communities, it can also feel like they're quite distant to the coastal communities, and they're trying to wrap their heads around how this may benefit them. So I think this is a question for Dawn around, concrete mechanisms that you've seen or that you'd recommend in ensuring that there's local economic benefits, are visible and trusted to these communities. And actually, Riley and Lindsay, I mean, you're welcome to answer this as well when you think of your sectors, but I'll start with Dawn here.
I think when it comes to community benefits, the key attribute of success is making sure they're tailored to the specific communities rather than trying to create some one size fits all and trying to assume what the community actually needs. So having a community benefit agreement that actually lays out what those targets are and reporting against progress, it is a core attribute irrespective of what exactly the specific benefits are. In terms of what those benefits actually look like, in many cases they're job related, but they can also be training for local youth, or retraining for displaced industries, can be related to environmental protections, it can be related to building out waterfronts. And again, really important that as we develop these things, we sit down and listen to what those specific communities are actually concerned about. Having some level of a committee, community monitoring committee, a manner to keep that ongoing dialogue, I think is as well a bit of a lessons learned from the global industry that we could bring into Canada, just to make sure that we're staying aligned, where we know what's happening, the communication lines stay open. These are very long-term projects, so it's important to keep the dialogue happening.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And starting early is really key to all of that. I have some other questions here, but before we go on to those, I don't know if Lindsay or Riley, I just wanted to give you the opportunity if there was anything you wanted to mention on, benefits to local communities, ensuring that they're part of these projects, that kind of thing, or I can move on to the next question if you guys are good. Okay.
I just think like in ensuring communities they have engendered pride in the projects are being developed and that they fit in as good neighbors within the marine space in the context of all the other existing uses.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I don't have equity needs to be built in early, and so nothing more to add.
Okay, so that's actually a perfect segue to the question I was just going to ask next. The vision talks quite a bit about Indigenous ownership, equity in projects, and long-term participation. And I know this is an area that all of you have been involved in some way in terms of Indigenous partnerships and relationship building. And so what I'm wondering from what, the relationships you have, what are some of the practical barriers you see to moving from engagement to co-ownership? And what needs to change in how projects are financed or governed to make equity participation more of the norm when it comes to marine renewable energy? Um, I know, in looking at projects, smaller scale probably tends to be an easier in terms of engaging in projects financially, whereas, larger offshore wind projects probably are going to be more challenging. But very interested to hear what, some of your perspectives are on that. And maybe I'll start with Riley on this one first.
I mean, it's a bit out of my realm of expertise, but for smaller scale, like wave and tidal projects, it's ensuring there is sufficient public funding to de-risk that project. Like, I wouldn't recommend to any of our Indigenous partners to take out loans at like a 5 to 8% interest rate. There's just too much uncertainty around some of the risks associated with projects and some of the infrastructure. Anchors are not an appreciating asset. I wouldn't recommend that a community tries to own that, but more so finding effective partnerships for them to integrate technologies into community, have them be trialed, and then be ready to take up ownership stakes in projects that would actually provide a return on investment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dawn or Lindsay on kind of removing some of those barriers for Indigenous participation?
These comments will align with what Dawn said in previous question and then also Riley's comments, but just to really emphasize it because this is, what our experience and observations have been that practically Indigenous communities are often invited in too late after the project and commercial arrangements are designed. So equity then becomes, a small piece of risk with limited control, really, or a large piece of risk, depending on the project. But governance has to shift from consultation to shared decision making, and I feel that as we work with Indigenous partners and organizations, we're seeing the conversation change, but there's still a long way to go. But to see Indigenous leadership embedded on boards and oversight structures, so economic participation and governance authority are hand in hand, and it's true equity partnership.
Yeah,
I think adding to there's definitely financing mechanisms that need to be in place. You don't want to engage communities too late. I think there's also a bit of a risk of engaging too early as we're forming and having a bit of a under 5 football where everyone is jumping in trying to engage with the same communities before we have any real solid plan. So I think there is benefit to the industry coordinating and taking a coordinated approach to how we're engaging with communities, so you don't just get engagement exhaustion from the same communities having their door knocked on again and again and again. So I think it is incumbent on us within the industry to be a little thoughtful as to how we're using people's time and taking a bit of a broader approach and building that trust over time without asking as much of the communities.
Yeah, I agree. It can become a real capacity issue for some of these communities. I'm noticing we have a question here from the audience, and we're close to time, but I wanted to ask this. And it's very, I think probably it's a very specific question. So not necessarily about the sector vision, but it does have to do with it. So how can communities specifically on the Pacific West Coast get access or help to bring tidal energy generators from outside Canada to help power communities today while also showing proof of concept and opportunities to start real world research on the ecological impact for future development and expansion. So to me, I mean, I could try to help answer this, but I might throw it over to Riley and Jonathan. You may have something around just kind of the funding and things like that that may be available to help with that, but whoever wants to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, there was some funding about a year and a half ago through the Natural Resources Canada Energy Innovation Program, Stream 2, which was specifically focused on renewable energy projects that were Indigenous led. So that was a really good opportunity to look at building out projects. On the environmental impact side of things, what we're trying to do at Blind Channel and developing sort of a living lab with a 25 kilowatt vertical axis tidal turbine. We're going to have optical monitoring and imaging sonar and a hydrophone. So really trying to contribute to the state of knowledge through ocean energy systems environmental to address some of those knowledge gaps. And then more broadly, if there's ever an interested community, feel free to reach out to Primed, and the team can see what sort of like high level resources we might have available on the tidal resource in a community's kind of local area, and then can work to identify potential funding to dive a little bit deeper into pre-feasibility.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that, Riley.
Yeah, maybe I would just add quickly. So the BC government does have a number of programs, as Riley mentioned, and there's support out there, but there are still challenges in getting sufficient capital, and that's a big reason why we've made the recommendation to the federal government that they renew and expand those existing programs that did exist that could support projects just like that.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so we're at time, and I know people are probably dropping to get to other meetings. So first, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Also, a very special thank you to Riley, Lindsay, and Dawn and Jonathan for your insight and thoughtful contributions and just helping us kind of show how this sector vision can come alive and what's needed. As I mentioned, this has been a pretty big milestone for MRC and our members and the sector as a whole. And we're not really, we're not stopping here with it. We've launched it, but over the coming months, we're going to be continuing our work with members and government and Indigenous groups and stakeholders to provide more education on the sector and the opportunity. And then also working, collectively to help action those recommendations that are going to be really critical to moving the sector forward. So I invite those of you that joined us today, please feel free to reach out if you want to learn more or have questions. I really encourage you to have a look at the sector vision on our website. Because as been said, many times now, is that realizing the vision is really going to require a coordinated approach. And we hope that many of you that joined us today are going to, help us move this vision forward. So thank you everybody for joining, and we look forward to working with you on this in the coming months and years. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
And Jonathan.
Bye guys.